Welcome to the Caffeine Stream on Caffeine and Philosophy.
All right, hello everyone. Welcome to the Caffeine Stream. My name is C.B. Robertson. This is episode 53, and this is kind of a weird one. I've been taking requests on subjects via Instagram, and a number of people asked me to talk about my background. How did you become the way you are, essentially? And I was initially very hesitant to do anything biographical while I'm still young. 32 I think is too young, but today being the day I'm officially no longer 32, I'm 33. I think I might be old enough now.
I think you're old enough.
Okay, so we thought we'd do a kind of an interview, I guess, as to answer the question, why am I like this? Both for the people who want to avoid this, but also for the people who might want to emulate and get a little bit more of this. Because my impression was that a lot of the people asking wanted to get more into philosophy or learning things or using words to write or speak or
Something about the way you had to come up with the...
It was a little awkward. Speaking of using words.
Using words.
That's how you use words right there.
Yeah, you were using them, babe.
Using them. Yeah.
Well, so yes, there is no one who is a greater expert in C.B. Robertson than his beloved wife. Many things to which he himself was the sole witness. I can still remember better than him. Because I think that's just a phenomena of testicular
like yesterday.
Memory. Yes, indeed, like yesterday.
I have no recollection. I'm sure I do. I just the details are blurry to me.
The details are a bit fuzzy. Yes. So okay. So let us do a little recap of why are you like this, Chris? So in me making a few notes in preparation to interrogate my own husband about why he's like this, I began with your early years. The earliest thing that I know about you in philosophy is that when you were 11, you got to go to a philosophy camp that was hosted at the university near us at that time when you were a kid.
University of Washington. You can say
that. Fine. Yes, indeed. The UW, as they say. So, but one does not fall into a philosophy camp at age 11. So that I actually don't know. You must have had an interest in philosophy prior to that, or otherwise you wouldn't have gone to that camp in the first place.
Well, yeah. I mean, I guess you can always trace causality back further and further and further.
The amount that I want to make an Aletheia versus DK joke here, because all you have been talking about is the two Greek words for truth, is very strong, and I want praise for how much of a joke component, the elements of a joke.
There's a third Greek word. Do you know it?
No. Hang on, wait.
It's not the phenomena. It's the
noumena.
There we go. Yep.
Yeah, I'm so good.
You are so
I'm
good.
such a good wife.
Yeah. Well.
Okay.
I guess.
Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you. So when I grew up, I had friends beginning in literally kindergarten and first grade who were much smarter than me, like objectively. I had a pair of friends who were twins, and then a friend, a third friend, and then eventually a fourth friend who I became very, very good friends with later on. I won't say names, but these four of them, I think all four of them were objectively smarter than me, just in terms of like mathematical ability. Like we all were into gaming, especially chess, but also, tabletop gaming and stuff. And they were just very, very skilled. But we would walk to school together in middle school, all through middle, so 3 years. And it was about a mile walk, and we would talk like the whole way in each direction about a wide variety of things. And some of it was gaming related, whether that was Warhammer 40K or we usually didn't talk about chess, but just science stuff, hypothetical stuff. And we would have discussions as middle schoolers about, the sorts of questions you might find in a Platonic dialogue, among other things. Not that we were on par with Plato as 7th graders, obviously. But we were.
I will say, the people have often, I've seen this, I've just discussed this. There was one lady in particular who I saw recently talking about how 11-year-old girls could run the world. And I'm not going to lie. Anyone who doesn't have to pay taxes, go to a regular day job, or make their own food probably could run the world. And so you may have been having very good Socratic dialogues because you had literally no other responsibilities besides walking to and from school.
Oh, right. Yeah. I mean, yeah.
There are no constraints. You didn't have to worry about money. You might have been solving problems. No one will know except for the distance between your house and your middle school.
Right. Funny you say that. There is actually a Nietzschean argument that Western philosophy and the tradition of philosophy is contingent on the existence of a slave class to make time for the leisure class to indulge in philosophy. We don't have to go in there right now.
I was gonna say, am I your slave class now, babe?
Well, it's weird to think of middle schoolers as the leisure class, but
there's like the epitome of the leisure.
There's
class.
A degree of truth to that. Yeah,
all they do is go to sports that they're driven to by their parents, who pay for it, and.
Yeah. But I mean, I distinctly remember
lunch made by the lunch lady.
I distinctly remember being introduced to a book called Gödel Escher Bach in middle school by my friends, and we would have discussions about Achilles and the crab, talking about canons and talking like the musical canons and talking about like Zeno's paradox and things like that. I remember. One of the few discussions I remember with some distinctness was we were literally having a discussion on the nature of black holes in 6th grade, walking away. So I think those conversations with friends, especially when there's a not deep-seated, but a degree of competitiveness, a degree of interest in proving your friends wrong, goes a long way in being careful in your arguments. Because if you say something that is transparently silly,
you will be laughed at by a 14-year-old boy.
You will be not just mocked, but also like your position will be taken apart.
Oh yes. Well, and this will become part of the lore of these stupid ideas that you've ever said out loud that we will never forget for the rest of the time that we know you, because spoiler alert, Chris still knows these people to this day. So that's 25 years of collected I cannot believe you said that. So the stakes were high.
Yeah. And it was like I think if there was any kind of foundation laid for that. And a lot of this comes down to interests. Like if your friends are interested in sports, like you're going to go in a different direction in your thought. If your friends are interested in, D&D or in, something else. Well, I mean, we also talked about that. But I think that was really a foundation, probably.
Well, okay, so you had good friends. I will tell you, and we'll get to this. I put in my notes that I would like to discuss you and your living out your philosophy by being a tradesman. But I will say, I have met all of these men to whom we are alluding, and all of them have decent lives. I like your life the best. If I were to, also your physicality. When people have what's the word for that? When you have what's the word for that? When you look like you would look like that. You know what I mean?
You're talking about physiognomy?
Yes. The twins in particular have the physiognomy of people who are smarter than you, but don't have a lot of other things that are better than what you have as far as life going on, attractiveness, wives, children.
We might be getting into subjective territory of taste.
Well, perhaps, yeah.
We don't know what their life preferences might be, but
yes.
I would agree that I like my life. Excellent. I love my life. It's wonderful. I wouldn't trade it for anybody's.
Oh, very good. Okay, so you went to a philosophy camp when you were 11. Even that story though, you're discussing walking to middle school, and that's after the philosophy camp. So anyway, regardless, you had a philosophy interest, and we're a nerd, evidently.
Mhm.
And I would say that something I can tell about you is that you have, or that I can tell must have been apparent from the time you were a small child, because I have met your children, which is your verbal intelligence is very high. And we have synthesized that into possibly the most verbally capable children on the face of the planet. So I'm positive that you demonstrated the beginnings of your prowess from a very young age, hence heading you in a philosophy direction. So part of it is that I think you are naturally predisposed to being very, very verbal and very verbally intelligent. Things like physical, mechanical knowledge, like understanding of space and dimensions and things like that is not necessarily your strong suit. I can say still that you are sometimes navigationally challenged with keeping track of where you're going.
If I was commissioned in the military, I would be that LT that gets their unit lost on land nav.
Yeah. So yeah,
that's a military joke for military listeners.
Well, and yeah, so yes, part of your life history is you were in the military briefly, but you never did anything cool. Poor Ted. Never got to do anything cool before you were discharged. But so let's see. You were 11, went to philosophy camp, continued being like that until you were older.
I should mention that I went into the military immediately after high school, much to the surprise and consternation of my parents and my friends.
Mm-hmm.
Because the school I went to was a very upper middle class school where everyone goes to college. Everyone is slated to go to college. We went to, there's what's called international baccalaureate classes, which is like advanced placement, but for like to international standards. It's even more ridiculous. And I was friends with those crowd. I did some IB classes. I didn't get the IB diploma because that was ridiculous. But, I had actually gotten accepted to a university, but I didn't go.
Hang on. You're jumping ahead of my
story. I just wanted to say the reason I went to the military was because of a philosophy course I took in my senior year as well. So not only did I go to a philosophy camp, I also took a philosophy course called The Theory of Knowledge, which was really just an introduction to philosophy at a very broad level class. And something about some of the subjects we studied in that class really ingrained the idea of skin in the game for me, which I hadn't read by Nassim Taleb. I don't think it was published in 2009, but I wanted...
Oh my God, you were in high school in 2009?
Yeah, I graduated in 2009. Yeah.
Oh my God, that seems so long ago.
It is a while ago, yeah. I'm 33 now. So I had political opinions, and I knew that I was going to have political opinions. I discovered Christopher Hitchens, in fact, in that class, because a friend and I were writing a paper on waterboarding, and Hitchens was one of the rare journalists who said, well, let's really research this thing, and had himself waterboarded and changed his mind on it. And I was so struck by the idea that a journalist might actually change their mind on something. I was like, there is integrity. And because of that experience and because of just that class in general, I decided if I was going to have political opinions, I really ought to have some skin in the game. I really ought to have maybe experienced things, or at least put my name down on the list, to suffer the consequences of these things in order to sort of earn the right to have an opinion on these things in a Starship Troopers-esque kind of way. That was actually explicitly my reasoning for joining the military in the first place. And I had initially joined the reserves just so that I could go to college, and then thinking maybe I'll go active duty later. But then I very quickly changed my mind and wanted to go active duty, but they wouldn't let me. But that's a tangent for another time, I guess.
Well, okay. So yeah, this weekend we've been regaling each other with old stories. I never heard about this philosophy class. So yeah, this is news to me. Yeah,
theory of knowledge with Don Brayman, excellent teacher. Not that anyone will know that, but it's funny because the guy I was working on that paper on waterboarding with also joined the Navy, funnily enough, and spent like 6 or 8 years in there. Oh. So yeah, it was a
very influential class.
Time. Yeah.
Well, okay, so let's dwell on Chris in high school then, because that's the philosophy thread. So the beginnings of your philosophy were there from obviously tender age, kindergarten ages,
Yeah.
and then continued on through high school. I did not know specific. I knew that you knew you wanted to have skin in the game in order to like pontificate on things, and so you went into the military. I didn't know specifically that it came out of that class, but that's kind of the beginning of the philosophy thread, and I already can see how you feeling that you need to like in some way the beginnings of your virtue ethicist quality of like needing to be a good person and be a person who is in some way harmonious with the values that you espouse is literally been there the whole time, which I find very admirable. So that's the beginnings of the philosophy thread. Let's also take a parallel line and talk about your history of faith, because that is that is an elaborate story. So let me tell you my understanding of the order of your faith relationship, your walk with the Lord.
Oh, geez.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong. So you grew up in a nominally Christian house that sometimes went to church. Not all the time, but like, you were more than Christmas and Easter Christians. Would you say?
Yeah, I would say we went to church probably more Sundays than not, but we were very much a Sunday Christian house.
Yeah, so if there's like for people who don't know anything about who've never been in a Christian church, you may not know some of these things. So there are people who never go to church, who are nothing, and who don't profess to be anything. There are people who say they're Christian but never go to church. There are C&E Christians, the Christmas and Easter Christians, who only show up on the major holidays. There are Sunday Christians who show up on Sunday, most Sundays even, but otherwise live a completely nominally like secular life. And then there are like the devotees who are there like 3 days a week and they do all the...
I would say, so a term I used borrowed, I should say, I didn't come up with this term, sociologists did. I used in Holy Nihilism, though, was moralistic therapeutic deists. I think that was my family growing up.
From what I know of them, I've never attended the same church you actually went to when you were a kid.
Well, so there's the church you attend, and then there's like the environment of your family.
No, I know. I'm trying to, from my own data points of like, what can I glean about what your family believes from watching their behaviors and,
very, very little, right?
Well, let us not, it's the holiday season and it's time to bash on our in-laws. Okay, anyway.
No. I mean, it was the broader environment too.
Sure.
It was very much a social club, not just for my parents, but also for many of the other church attendees.
Right. So but the point is that you were familiar with faith. You went, you heard stuff. You went to Sunday school on Sunday, presumably when you were there. And out of that, somewhere around what age would you say you decided to take your faith more seriously?
8th or 9th grade.
Okay.
I don't remember precisely.
So yeah, that's my understanding, is basically high school Chris became unbelievably, possibly painfully Christian. Like really very into it, very committed. Since we're referencing people who you knew, I know you had a very serious and completely platonic girlfriend who shared your deep, profound faith, for whom I have zero jealousy. And you were very, very into, I know your embarrassing story that you told in Holy Nihilism is like, you realized you're like, maybe I've gone too far, at the point when you're like email blasting all of your family, like, where do you go after you die? And like, just very intense.
There was
proselytizing.
I told a story in Holy Nihilism it wasn't even a religious email per se. It was one of those generic feel-good emails that was like becoming popular in the 90s and early 2000s when email was still new, and all your, like, that one aunt you have would send you that, like,
all those chain, and then you send it to 5 more people.
Exactly. Or like something bad will happen. And so I did one of those, and I literally had a plan in my mind where I would begin by softening people with a feel-good thing, and then I would follow it up with something more religious. Like I had a plan in mind, but then one of those friends who I mentioned I have, who is like very smart, smarter than me,
and apparently can read.
Noticed that one of the, because I didn't BCC, I didn't understand the difference between carbon copy and blind carbon copy in those days. This is new technology for a 9th grader, 10th grader.
Also, you were new.
Yeah, so he noticed that one of the lists on there, he knew my dad's email address, and he saw the email address for my dad was tagged as dad, with scare quotes in the carbon copies, and he responded to it. So he CC'd all, saying, "We know it's you, Chris. This is not cool." And I was so embarrassed. I was like, "Oh, God damn it!"
It was my proselytizing. I was queuing it up.
But it was a very funny moment of like having this experience of you're so certain that God has called you to do a thing, and then the thing that you were so certain you were called to do goes so hilariously, embarrassingly wrong. Like it's not like a big problem. It's
I was gonna say this is the cutest low stakes embarrassing email. This is such a 2005 story.
Yeah, it's a classical faux pas for like a middle school, high school kid, and it was a good learning experience about like internet etiquette and stuff. But what it did was it opened my mind to the idea of what on earth was that voice I was hearing telling me to do this?
And then you thought for yourself for a second, oh no.
Well, it led, I didn't put that together right away, but a year or two later, I began discovering, like atheist videos, because this was the very beginning of the new atheist movement as well.
And the Four Horsemen. Exactly.
I mean, Richard Dawkins had already been around for some time. Sam Harris and Christopher Hitchens were really coming into their own. I don't understand fully how Daniel Dennett got grouped into them, although I'm glad he did. He was never anywhere remotely as popular as the other three. But it was... I wasn't familiar with any of them. I heard a classmate once mention Richard Dawkins and the Selfish Gene as a very interesting and worthwhile book. To this day, I still haven't read it, but I understand the premise, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's a cool idea. But I remember very distinctly seeing a video on the...
Are you going to tell me the milk jug story?
Yes.
Yes, okay.
So I'll mention it briefly. There was a video put out in the old days of YouTube when it was still basic, like just people in their rooms making like
old YouTube. Yes,
yeah,
we know. We're also, everyone listening to this, babe, I'm pretty sure is also old. We all know old YouTube.
Gen Z people might not know, but YouTube used to be cool.
Yes, you have a large audience with Gen Z.
YouTube used to be cool. Anyways, it's TikTok these days, I guess. They won't be listening to this. But like this guy put out a video talking about how Christians say that prayer is answered. And if you are a middle school, high school believing Christian, prayer and literalism is still a very, very important part. I had what I would call a naive, literal understanding of Christianity, where like having your prayers answered is very important. And this guy put out a video saying, look, all these Christian establishments say that God has 3 answers to prayer: yes, no, and wait. And like to a Christian, that might actually sound somewhat comforting, because the idea that God might say no to a request like makes a lot of sense. The idea that God might say yes to a request is like, well, that's very gratifying. The idea that he might say wait to a request is like very, feels very mysterious, but also makes sense in a theological kind of way. But then what this guy on this YouTube video did is he said, and remember, like this is not going to sound profound to the mature audience here, but to a middle schooler or high schooler who is very deeply believing, this was kind of world shattering. So now imagine you replace God with this milk jug. If you pray to this milk jug, no matter what you ask, the milk jug will respond with yes, no, or wait. and it walked through a couple hypothetical examples. And indeed, like Geico insurance sales, that you could save up to 15% or more on car insurance. It covers all the bases. It tells you actually nothing. Anything that is answered with yes or no or wait by outcomes tells you precisely nothing. And, it occurred to me in that, that was the exact moment. I remember it very distinctly. It was October of my junior year of high school that I said, I cannot believe this anymore. And it wasn't immediately following the video, but it was a month or two later. I was like, I can't believe this anymore. And there was like a couple of months where I kept going to church and I felt kind of sad, I guess. Not angry, not anything like that. Just like,
all you deluded people.
Well, no, not even that. Just like, it was disorienting, I guess. It was very like,
it was untethering.
Yeah,
untethered.
And after a little while of that, I did actually feel very intense anger for about 6 months. Not at God, which is like the standard line from Christians, like you're just angry at God. It's like, no, I'm angry that God does not exist. I'm not angry at God. That's absurd.
I don't believe he exists. And that's why I'm mad.
No. What I was mad at was I was angry at everyone around me for bringing me up in this belief that intrinsic to the belief is its importance. This is literally the most important question in the world. Does God exist or not? And they were treating it with such cavalier,
casual indifference.
Casual indifference. Yes, exactly. And they had led me to believe something false that was of the utmost consequence, and they acted completely indifferent. Their faith was so shallow on the most important question in the world that and they were expecting me to follow along too. It was not just hypocritical. It was like a kind of spiritual negligence that I had an extremely hard time forgiving.
I will say, one of the things that I know about you very well, I love, is that you are a fundamentally deep person. You are like falling into a well of ideas. It goes all the way down. Anything shallow, you like, it's whatever people feel like when they maybe go to like a new space. Like, I don't know, you go to college for the first time, you go take a college class, or you go to I don't know, you level up in some martial arts or something, and you realize like, oh crap, I am out of my depth. Like, these people are way deeper than me. That you seem to have the reverse experience in the presence of shallowness. You're like, I don't know what to do with all this this giant pillar of depth on the surface. Like, where do I put all of this? Who can hold all of my ideas? I am in this puddle. It is not deep enough for me. And it's something that I think you and I connect on, but I also think is very, I mean, I will say that it seems to me to typify a lot of people on the west side in the Seattle area. I think it also maybe is pervasive in Christian cultures right now. Like, I'm sure there's a lot of this kind of casual apathy, where it's like, you know, kind of going through the motions, the lukewarm, that I'm pretty sure Jesus is going to spit out of his mouth at the day of reckoning. But anyway, and so, but I would say, like, there's the frequency with which you met shallow people that could not handle your depth and that you had nowhere to go with your depth was very high in the Seattle area, because there's something about that. I don't know how much anybody else knows about like the Seattle freeze and Seattle culture, but like it lends itself to remaining shallow even in serious things. I know that the Christian thing is,
it lends itself to shallowness and then to feelings of loneliness that express itself in grunge.
Well, don't leave my Pearl Jam out of this.
But I mean, that was the initial.
I'm just saying that like the Seattle aspect was one part of the frequency with which you met relatively shallow people, and the desire they had to remain shallow. Like, let's not go too deep into any of this. Plus, I know that this is a larger Christian criticism that many people have of the lukewarm Christians. So I can't imagine being somebody who with such a profound desire for depth and being so young and, like you said, at that time very kind of literalist in your thinking, like to the nth degree because you're only 17, having to navigate like 2 layers of that kind of shallowness and not really wanting to like make it icky by really talking about whether we're all dying, like where we go after death or whatever.
And it was very interesting for me to become more, to mature in my understanding of Christianity in particular. I remember one moment in particular, there was a conversation in Christopher Hitchens' living room of all places. And
what year is this?
This
for
was
my reference?
2007 or 2008.
I'm just trying to establish it's still in the high school.
I didn't hear. No, this is afterwards. My hearing this was after it happened.
Okay.
But Hitchens, one of the 4 asked the other 3, like, what do we say about these so-called serious theologians? Which was a very interesting way of putting it. And Richard Dawkins' answer, I think it was Hitchens asking the question. I could be wrong, but Dawkins' answer was, well, they don't matter because no one listens to them among the faithful. And it was a very strange experience because I didn't stop studying religion when I became an atheist. Mm-hmm. I was still interested in it, and I started to learn a lot about Islam, actually. But going deeper into the arguments, like I would literally sit down with an old-fashioned, this was my standard evening as a high school,
I was going to say high schooler,
as a college writer for the school paper.
Completely above board, totally legal, and in no way.
This is after the military too.
Okay, yeah. So you're you're strictly speaking of legal age.
I would sit down with an old-fashioned, and I would pull up a 2-hour debate on religion of some sort. And I would pull up Skyrim, and I would mindlessly play Skyrim and drink while I listened to this debate. And I would do
this havoc persists to this day.
I mean, not quite to the same frequency. But,
it is a habit that persists to this day. Maybe not daily.
Good debates kind of went out of fashion. There's still the occasional IQ squared debate, but most of those are kind of garbage these days. But anyways, yeah, what I came to realize was that there actually are very serious philosophical arguments for religion that are not this naive literalism.
I am having the hardest time with everyone's names. Who's that one guy with the 3 names that we really like who does debates? The really nice... oh, gosh, he's got the most wonderful voice. I can almost think of it. He's done a bunch of debates with him and Hitchens.
It's not Douglas Murray.
No.
William Lane Craig?
Yes.
William Lane Craig is
even
excellent.
I love him.
William Lane Craig is, if you are ever looking for a good Christian apologist, William Lane Craig is the benchmark. He's absolutely phenomenal.
Well, okay, so hang on. You're doing a little bit of name dropping there. I know that you're so if I overlay the Christian story with the philosophy story up to Chris's high school. If we overlay these 2 major influences, you've got the philosophy and the Christianity. It seems like they're coming together into your high school years. You kind of fell out of faith. You got very rabid going into high school, very serious about your Christian faith, presumably also interested in philosophy. And then as your faith was falling away, here comes this class with Hitchens. And the amount that I want to dwell on Hitchens is not a lot, because I feel that I have lived my entire life dwelling on Hitchens, because so have you. And the thing about Hitchens, Chris enters the Hitchens era. I feel that it would be if you are listening to this podcast and you have yet to read any of Chris's books, and you go to read In Defense of Hatred and you say, man, there's something weird about this style. What is happening here? It's like I'm reading English that I can recognize, but the italics make no sense, which is actually a criticism I gave, and also a criticism that some random, I swear to God, not me, Amazon reviewer has also made about Chris's books, which is that he italicizes very randomly. And it is because there's a part of Chris that is so heavily and deeply, profoundly influenced by the meter and pace of Christopher Hitchens that it is actually slightly easier to read In Defense of Hatred if you go ahead and read some Hitchens first. Like, listen to Christopher Hitchens. I think it's the beginning of the first chapter of In Defense of Hatred. He does that speech, the fire, shouting fire in a crowded theater. If you listen to that speech and then read the book, all of the language will make sense in that book. If you just go ahead and like prime the pump with some Hitchens first. The amount that Hitchens, also Douglas Murray, some of these other people who we've already name dropped a little bit, have influenced you and how you think and what you write is so profound. So let us discuss briefly the love affair between the two Chris's, Chris and Christopher Hitchens.
Well, that fire comes from a speech he gave at Hart House in the University of Toronto in 2008.
Like, you already hear it in the way you said Toronto.
And for a decent period of time, I had that entire 22-minute speech memorized.
I legit thought you were about to go into it. Okay.
I could do it. Fire. Not shouted in a crowded theater, admittedly, as I seem to have now shouted in the Hogwarts dining room. But the point is made. Everyone knows the fatuous verdict of the greatly overpraised Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, who, when asked for an actual example of when it would be proper to limit speech or define it as an action...
All right, nerd. Later we'll ask for a recitation of Greek. What were you...
Andres Athanaio Pepon Fate.
All right. In case you ever wondered what it is like being Chris and Sierra, the answer is there's a lot of reciting lines. I can do the entire first two sentences of the Declaration of Independence. That's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
And you know what? I'll tell you, this is a funny story that has nothing to do with the main plot line. But I was once at a campsite and my parents were having a very, very nice, but it needed to wrap up and get done, conversation with a pair of boomers who we met at an RV camp while we were camping in Yellowstone many, many years ago. And the conversation could not seem to wrap up. Like, we were all just agreeing back and forth on boomery things, boomery-esque, traditionally conservative opinions that we like. And you know what? Get your homeschool kid to drop the first, when in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands. And man, you can end a conversation with a boomer. There's nothing left to say after that. And so then we all went back in our RVs.
Nice. It's like straight out of, was it Captain Fantastic? Yes. Where Viggo Mortensen has his daughter recite some line. No, don't recite it. Give your own interpretation.
Yeah,
she gives
Bill of Rights. Yeah, the Ninth Amendment. Yeah, so there's nothing like sicking your homeschool kid on some boomers, and everybody will go get a hot dog.
Hitchens was what turned me into a free speech crusader. And that got me into all kinds of crazy worlds. We'll leave it at that for now. I'm sure we'll come back to that in future episodes. But when you defend free speech, you end up defending the free speech of
some pretty ugly dudes.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the lines that got Christopher Hitchens in a little bit of hot water in that particular speech, that defense of hate speech, as he called it, which not only ended with like talking about Islam in a very aggressive manner, but also he said, what would you do if you come across a Flat Earth Society member? Come to think of it, how could I prove the Earth is round? Am I sure about the theory of evolution? I know it's supposed to be true. Here's someone who believes there's no such thing. It's all intelligent design.
Is this a meme?
Yes, it is. But he also defended an interesting character named David Irving. David Irving is a World War II historian, quite famous, or was quite famous until he published the Goebbels diaries and demonstrated that the Hitler diaries were fraudulent. And Hitchens actually in the speech says he learned more from David Irving about the Second World War than he did from Hugh Trevor Roper and A.J.B. Taylor combined, other famous World War II historians. That was a ballsy move because David Irving is falsely, but not without any evidence either, accused by a great number of people of being a Holocaust denier. Now, he doesn't deny the Holocaust happened, but he does challenge some of the
core detail,
some of the essential details of the ordinary narrative. And now, I have not personally read any of David Irving myself, but I've heard good things about him as a serious historian and so forth. And it was one of Hitchens' points in defense of free speech that isn't it amazing that the Austrians, who created Hitler in the first place, are now doing what they did in World War II all over again and censoring people who are inconvenient to their politics. It was actually a very Nazi-like move to put David Irving in jail, in prison in Austria, for suggesting that he might give a speech talking about his findings in World War II history. And, that got Hitchens in a little bit of hot water because David Irving was persona non grata in the historian world. But I mean, if you defend free speech, you do end up defending Flat Earth Society members. You do end up defending Nazis. You do end up defending perhaps white nationalists.
Trump people, all the deplorables.
All the deplorables, yes. All the deplorables, right. And especially in an age of increasing digital censorship like the one we're in today, it becomes an increasingly like the line between principled people and unprincipled people is becoming a lot clearer. And a lot of the people who say that they support free speech, but, and there's some exception, becomes, a little bit more jarring. Now, that said,
what are you trying to say?
Well, there are a lot of people who say that they support free speech, but when push comes to shove, they're quite happy to ban certain books, to throttle or censor individuals.
Well,
and
see,
so forth.
I feel like what I would say there is most people they will say they value free speech, but they also will not object to somebody else doing it. They're always conveniently they are always the people who are not pulling the trolley problem.
They never stand up for someone whose beliefs they disagree with when they are getting censored.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, what was really crazy, what was a wild experience for me, because I was an absolute Hitchens fan, was discovering the serious arguments against free speech.
From who?
Well, from a number of people, from Vox Day, chiefly.
The other
But
name
also-
that we love to talk about.
But
Hey, if we can get Scott Adams in the podcast, we'll hit the trifecta.
right. Well, but more importantly, there's a wonderful book called The Great Debate, which is, The Great Dissent. I forget the author's name, but the author is a liberal. The author is a classical liberal, kind of left-leaning, but classical liberal, about Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes and the dissent in the 1919 Abrams case, where Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes essentially redefined what the freedom of speech meant. The freedom of speech in 1789, as defined in the First Amendment, had a technical legal definition. What that definition was the prohibition on prior restraint. And I should have known this earlier because Hitchens actually knew this and essentially articulated it, although you wouldn't necessarily have picked it up if you didn't know what to listen for, in his defense of hate speech at Hart House, recently, where he said, was talking about prior restraint, which is banned in the United States by the First Amendment.
Right, it's the prior restraint is what they did to Irving.
Yeah.
They put him in jail because he was gonna give a speech.
Exactly.
Instead of letting him give the speech so we can arrest him afterward.
Which is also what censorship looks like today with throttling on social media. It is a case study in prior restraint done in collusion with the U.S. government or pressured by them. on these companies. So it's an explicit violation of the First Amendment in its proper sense. But that's actually a lot narrower than what a lot of libertarians believe free speech entails. Mm-hmm. And also what a lot of liberals and conservatives believe, which is I can say anything I want without consequence. That's not what it said. Back in 1789, or was it 1792? I don't remember exactly the year when
I think it's 89. I think
I'm not talking about the Bill of Rights. I'm talking about the Alien and Sedition Act.
Oh.
Which might have been the 1790s. But it was within living memory of the people who wrote the Bill of Rights, and they made it a criminal offense to insult the uniform of the armed forces. Mm. Now, today we would say, that's protected speech. And it is protected speech because of Oliver Wendell Holmes' dissent and the redefinition of what the First Amendment actually means by free speech. But at the time, it was only a prohibition on prior restraint and arguably, according to Justice Robert Jackson, a prohibition on compelled speech.
Have you done a podcast on free speech on this podcast?
You know what? I don't think I have. I probably should.
We should table the rest of this because even I, who have read the crap out of that first chat, if you want to Cliff Notes,
I think I just did.
Dude, I am like, I know all of these details and got date, time, and name whiplash from trying to keep up with that. So that was, and you're just okay. So guys, you gotta understand,
the Robert Jackson
this is who he is. Though when Chris and I very, very first met, I remember you pulled up. Do you remember that interview you did for Bellevue College? That was like you had to say 30 seconds on. I think it was the topic of free speech. Do you know what I'm talking about? That little interview you did. Mm. They prompted you with the question. You spoke off the cuff without a single stutter for 30 straight seconds and then said, that's why I believe in free speech. And I was like, oh my God. And we weren't even dating. I was like, that was amazing. How did you do that? And you're like, no one knows, especially free speech, better than Chris. You can speak extemporaneously. No, you don't have to pull it up right now.
Well, no, I'm just checking to see if it's still on the YouTube channel.
That would be very interesting. If you can find it, we will put it in the show notes of this podcast because that would be if you guys want to see some baby Chris action, like 23-year-old Chris. But anyway, so as you can tell, dude loves free speech. You could talk extemporaneously about that forever. You can get a Cliff Notes version of that's written down that you can read at your own speed if you read the first chapter of In Defense of Hatred, because a significant portion of, in fact, I think all of it's either the prologue or the first chapter.
This is the second video on my channel, falsely shouting fire in a crowded theater from 10 years ago. That's wild. Almost 11.
Oh man. See, before you got before you got all jacked, you looked more like your brother. That's very funny. Your brother still looks like that. You've moved on. You look a lot like your brother in that still there.
But okay,
I mean, so anyway,
it's been a subject of interest and that was 10 years ago. Was about the time I had that whole thing memorized. Mm-hmm. Like I've literally listened to that speech hundreds, plural, of times. And
some of us read Harry Potter, some of us listen to Christopher Hitchens.
But if you want the lowdown, the two books to read are The Great Dissent by, I forget the guy's name, I'll find it. And also there's a legal book that is a legal history of free speech in American schools called Let the Students Speak. And that's just a history of the jurisprudence of free speech cases in schools, where you learn about such things as bong hits for Jesus and also that Robert Jackson line about if there is one fixed star in our constitutional constellation, it is the basically the protection against compelled speech in some of the most beautiful language in Supreme Court jurisprudence. Excellent stuff.
Okay, so you like the First Amendment?
Well, it's interesting.
Hey, I'm trying to segue here, sir.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
So, okay. Something that I would say is not definable. So like as far as your personal aptitudes that you were born with this predisposition toward verbosity and loquacity and being able to talk real good. And we know this also use words, as we said at the beginning. What's funny about this is if you go into Chris's family history, especially on his the Robertson family line, you are littered with judges and lawyers and like very, very, very intelligent people who were very high up in government, who were very influential, and couple poets. You're just a long line of very verbal dudes who are very smart, very cerebral. So like some of this might be genetic. Some of it may have just like come to pass, like come out of who you are. Some of it is training. Your interest in Christianity came from, like your personal experience with it. And then obviously like there's nothing that lights the fire under an new atheist 18-year-old than Christopher Hitchens and the other atheists. I'm glad you don't like Sam Harris. That was something we connected on when we first got together. I was like, I knew you were into atheists. And then I was like, what do you think of Sam Harris? And you're like, that dude's a douchebag. And I was like, thank God.
Well, you know what's crazy? What's crazy, though, was I was actually initially semi-impressed with Sam Harris. I was never inspired by him in the way I was inspired by Hitchens.
No, have I seen an interview where what is his name? Sam Harris and Bill Maher are both on something talking about the evils of Islam, and I was like, oh my God, remember when we were allowed to talk about this in 2003?
Well, it's hard not to admire Sam Harris's verbal abilities. Like he is also a good speaker.
Good is an interesting word because I could not, like if a voice could have Schadenfreude. No. Is it Schadenfreude? What's the one where you want to punch somebody? Punch their face. Not Schadenfreude. Yeah. I wish man, look. There's no love lost between me and Sam. He's a voice. He's got the NPR voice, and I hate it. I hate it deeply in my soul.
So it was actually in the discovery.
The only good thing that I will allow him to have in his life, because I am so powerful, is that I'm glad that he had children despite his utilitarian precepts, because people need to be born more than he needs to have the world's worst idea.
Yeah. Listening to Sam Harris and David Benatar hash that out was pretty entertaining. But I mean, the person who actually cued me in that there might be something critical to say about Sam Harris was a different person who I discovered around this time. No. Oh. It was Jack Donovan.
Oh.
Who I'm still good friends with today. The early days. I want to say 2014 or so.
Yes. Okay. So hang on.
Sometime back then.
For date time continuum. So Chris graduated high school in 2009, and then you were briefly in the military for what, like 2 years?
Pretty much,
total.
Yeah.
2 year span of time.
Don't take Accutane, friends. Don't do it.
No. Not a good time. And then you and I met while we were both attending Bellevue College, and that's how we met at Speech and Debate. So like to the degree that you were exacerbated and very positively rewarded for choosing to be the way you are, you met your future wife. So, right. It worked out. I will say so the Christianity is an interest. Philosophy obviously is like, seems to you are deeply philosophical in your approach to the world. The thing that you and I especially connected on at that time was that you and I both also have like I think more modern parents would call this like defiant oppositional disorder or whatever that they call it.
Yeah. Well, the other thing, so one of the most,
but like we both very much enjoy trying to take that devil's advocate position of like whatever everybody is like in agreement, is wrong, or like everyone agrees that this is how it's done or whatever. You and I both are immediately like, does it have to be? I'm not sure. I'm going to look into it.
Well, a little bit. I think I wound up functionally acting in that way, but not because I was a punk. Not because I was a defiant "fuck you, dad." That wasn't me. I think the most persistent criticism I've gotten throughout my life from friends and family was that, Chris, you're too gullible. Chris, you're too Like
you're so open to every idea, even if it's dumb as all get out.
Right.
And
so
yes,
what would
I continue to be irritated with that.
What would end up happening is, there's some consensus view about a subject, and then some weird schizo on the outside would say that's all wrong. Like this thing was like it was the opposite. And
Chris with this tiny mic is like, what? Tell me everything.
And I would be, without trying to catch them out or embarrass them, without any kind of ulterior motive to humiliate them or get one over on them, would express interest and be like, why do you think that? And
no, okay. And I would love to tease you about your gullibility, because it is infuriating to listen to someone like profoundly entertaining and obviously asinine position that anyone with like any sense would be like, well, that's dumb, and move on with their lives. However, the depth of your curiosity and your capacity to hold completely stupid, abhorrent, illogical, and poorly thought out ideas, and you'll genuinely entertain them. You'll be like, yes, thank you for showing me your weird cat skull. I'm very interested. Here, you can have it back now.
Well, but
I admire that your curiosity is on another level.
Well, I mean, and it can certainly get you into trouble, though, and not just of the social kind by adopting views that are verboten, but like you can also get scammed more easily, and I really do think it is a kind of pathology, a kind of excessive openness. People talk about autistic people not having the ability to read faces. Exactly. I have this pet theory. It's sort of a hypothesis. I don't have strong evidence for it, but an idea that philosophy emerges when someone who has excessive openness begins to overcompensate. So in autism, people who are not very good at reading social cues can make a study out of reading social cues. And through conscious effort, they can actually become better at reading faces than normal people. They can actually become they can become like Paul Ekman's, picking up like micro expressions at a like conscious level. Mm-hmm. But they have to put in a lot of effort to do that, to do what other people can do consciously. I feel like philosophy emerges from people who have openness to a degree that borders on defective BS detector. Mm-hmm. Like if you have a defective BS detector and you're so open, by necessity over time you begin to develop conscious skills and patterns.
Yeah, to protect yourself.
Right. And so I think to the degree that people have been asking me, you should do a podcast on yourself to talk about how you became this way, they're asking that in order to like, how can I become a philosopher? And the short answer is you have to spend 15 to 20 years with a non-existent BS detector and put together patterns from scratch, essentially. At least that's one idea. Maybe that's not correct, but that's sort of a working hypothesis.
I think that's a very interesting. I have long felt, and maybe this is me pontificating on something of which I know nothing, but I have long felt that things like autism, things like over emotionality on the part of women, these things they can be limitations. And for a very small group of people, they can maybe be something that actually, like, you can become like an Olympic athlete to that degree. Some people are extremely, extremely physically talented. You're destined to go on and be, those people who do deep sea diving on only their own breath, right? Like, okay, you're a freak doing freak stuff. Good divers, for you. Yeah. Great. And for those few people who have really great lung capacity, like, go do that, However, the vast majority of us need to compensate through a combination of two things. One, becoming well-rounded and working on the skills that you don't have. And two, marrying a spouse who has all the skills that you don't have.
Well, and right, that, but and also, and perhaps more seriously, not developing too much of a grass is always greener complex about it, because one thing that was very interesting in reading George Soros's book, George Soros is a very interesting character because he's a financier who wishes he was a philosopher. And specifically, he wanted to make a dialectical synthesis between Hegel and Marx. Very, very grand aspiration. That's the culmination of his claim in The Alchemy of Finance. But he never really managed to do that. He never really managed to be a philosopher proper. And he got pigeonholed in finance. And I'm beginning to see the signs of people like Alex Hormozy and Andrew Tate, of other financially hyper-successful younger men who, once they achieve a degree of success in finance, say, you know what, this is not quite as satisfying as I would have liked. Maybe I should try my hand at philosophy. Maybe that would be more satisfying. Meanwhile, in the domain of philosophy, you find all these guys who reach, the pinnacle of philosophical success only to have a yearning for art. They're like, philosophy is not maybe as gratifying as I'd hoped. I really wish I'd done art. And then in the art world, you find a bunch of...
They're like, I'm so broke.
I need money. There's this hilarious, like three-way fence of grass, and everyone's yearning for the next one over. And in the end of the day, you don't need to be a philosopher to be happy any more than you need to be an artist or a financier to be happy. Although it does pay, I think, to develop skills in all three of those, just as it pays to develop some physical ability, even if you never compete in a strongman competition.
So there are two more things I want to talk about before we close out. So one of them is and the thread has already been started, this like living your philosophy and living in a way that is consistent with your principles. And so I want to talk about how you got into the trades. But the other thing is all the classic stuff. And maybe this is obvious to anyone who has spent more time. I like to read my philosophy secondhand. I'm a secondhand philosopher. So you read the book and then tell me what's in it, and then we talk about it. So I cannot be bothered to read it directly. I prefer to have it translated and annotated. Thank you very much. So maybe this is more obvious for people who are into philosophy, how you got into the classics, but because obviously the oldest philosophers that we know of are Greek. So you know what? I answered my own question. Never mind. I riddled it out. Thank you. Good job, Sierra. So
the answer to the question you didn't ask is that the value of studying the classics is engaging in the text directly.
Yes, well, so you see that is, and thus is unto the thing I will not do.
Sorry.
Right there next to karaoke. The one thing I will not do, read the text myself. Yeah. So, okay. Point taken. Then fine, let us conclude then with like I think we can settle on being very much virtue ethicists ourselves. I think especially in the absence of a belief in a monotheistic God. Now there is a little, you and I took a detour because I grew up, not that anyone asked, I grew up in an atheistic household. Like we didn't believe in anything, but my parents were very adamant that I should know that like, this is what your culture believes. So like, this is Jesus. He was born on Christmas. Not really. If you ask anyone, he was not actually born on Christmas. But anyway, Santa, more stuff. So my parents were not religious, but we talked about it. Like I was aware. You and I dated when both of us were atheists. And I think I've already told the charming story of us and the poor Christian girl who was very concerned about our salvation.
Gosh, yes.
And then we dated and then we broke up and then we got back together. And in that interim time, both of us had kind of returned. I had, for the first time ever, gotten interested in faith and had started attending a church. You had kind of circled back to it or were more open to it.
I had come back to an openness to Christianity by way of Campbellian and Jungian paganism. Actually.
Oh, right. You were, I feel like this was around the same time as when Jordan Peterson was coming around with his more Jungian interpretation of Christian faith?
I was probably in the first like 10,000 people to be aware of Jordan Peterson as he was becoming popular.
Mm-hmm.
Like I saw that initial video of him arguing with University of Toronto students, like within that first month that it happened or something.
I have always, and I think this is because of your curiosity, you have always somehow managed to be on the front lines of knowing stuff about stuff long before I've ever heard of these things. I remember, oh geez Louise, just all of your research into like what was going on with the alt-right before that was even a thing that anybody had ever heard that word on regular network TV.
Back in 2012. Because
yeah, see, for the rest of us, that was like 2015, 2016. And for you were like, I've known about this for years, guys.
Well, there was some weird forerunners to it in Greece, of all places. There was a...
the Golden Dawn?
Yes. And at about that time, I became aware of like Tachymag. Well, no, it was like a year later, I think. 2013, 2014, started becoming aware of Tachymag and then eventually Countercurrents, which could be a discussion for another time. But yeah, like that, then basically no one knew about that until Charlottesville. And because people became aware of the alt-right at Charlottesville, they came to think that the alt-right was just white nationalism, when in reality what the alt-right was a very wide-ranging, disparate group of ideas, many of which competed with each other, some of them racial, many of them not, that were just a wide range of alternative right-wing views to the mainstream Republican line. Yeah.
Well, so there's that, and then oh shoot, what was the other thing I was? What did you just say? What were you just discussing?
We were talking about Jordan Peterson.
Oh, right.
And Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung and the path back to Christianity via paganism for me and via something else for you.
Yeah, I had a little bit more of an existential crisis that led to an interest in monotheism that then promptly upon getting my life together, I was like, I don't know if I believe this anymore.
Well, it is funny how that works, because it does feel like the you read the Sermon on the Mount and the Beatitudes, it is so much of Christianity, and not just Christianity, but many monotheisms, kind of poach out the suffering, and not just the physically suffering, but also the spiritually suffering, and the people who are experiencing that monotonous dread of the same.
Yeah.
As a
they capitalize on anything you've ever felt shameful about, or that you've ever felt that you, in your own estimation, that you missed the mark. And then they're like, because that was sin and God will love you through it. And you're like, thank God someone will love me through it.
Yeah.
And you eat your ice cream and then you go to church. But so anyway, and I didn't mean to tee it up in that way, but like the thing about virtue ethics in general is that the belief that things are essentially good, or that you can cultivate certain virtues, which may be to the exclusion of others that could be virtues if also cultivated, but those are just not the ones you've basically niched into. Those are all that is very much a interpretation that you are imposing on the world. It is in your own estimation. You are going on your wisdom that I have missed the mark here. And I think that's where you, as you and I fell out of, we attended church hard, man. I went from I've never been to church to I now believe in this and I'm here 3 days a week. I worked at the church. I was hired at a church for a while. I wouldn't
say I ever fully believed again, but I very conscientiously went through the motions and acted out the part in the hopes that if I played the part of Christian long enough, belief would follow the action, and that I could become a believer by means of almost a fake it till you make it attitude of it.
Well, and there's something to that. I know that's something
that's what Mother Teresa did.
It's I from what I can tell, almost everybody who has ever been serious in their faith has gone to seminary and gone, I don't know if I can believe this absolute horse poopy. and then they're like, well, I'm already in the school and I got to keep coming. So, then they stick it with it.
Well, it's actually a very common story. That the story that connected me to atheism in high school was the story of not just a guy who was in seminary, but an actual pastor named Dan Barker, who wrote a book called Godless long before Ann Coulter pirated the title. And it was about his journey out of faith. It was the most compelling book to me when as a believer, much more so even than God is Not Great or The God Delusion or the other ones. Of course, Matt Dillahunty, who's one of the most famous atheists who still goes around debating Christians these days, was in seminary to be I want to say a Baptist minister when he realized this is not true.
So, well, right. So we've covered the Christian thing. We definitely there was like a detour where we revisited it, and I went hard, and it's, I can't deny, like, maybe this is one of the virtues that I can't ever hold back, is my desire to make money for things and to make things more better. I want to make it, I want everything to have a system and for it to work better. And so that's what I try to do to my church. And turns out I should take those efforts somewhere that will pay me more than $15 an hour. So I did. And I took my belief system with me. But the one of the virtues that both you and I really value a lot, and that I think is probably the last thread, that if somebody were listening to this and was like, okay, well, I can't go back and relive my entire life as a person with a verbal capacity and then an interest in profound curiosity and interest in philosophy
and a possibly broken BS detector.
Yeah, right. So what can I do from this point forward, Chris? This is not as instructive as I thought it was going to be. You got a hold of which one? Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance first?
Yes. Yes.
Before Matthew Crawford.
I think perhaps the most inspiring book to me in the late high school years, this is sort of an odd one, another hippie one from the Robert Pirsig age, but was a book by Richard Bach called Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And that was
I have never read that, and it's not very big. I should read that.
It's like 30 pages. You should.
Wow.
And it's basically an introduction to idealism and idealistic thinking. And it was very inspiring to me at the time. But you can I think get past that. It works in a very similar way to La Petite Prince for many people as like an introduction to philosophy concepts.
You know what? There's something else that must be called something similar to The Little Prince that I've tried to read many times, and every time I'm like, this is not. No, maybe it is The Little Prince. Does it have that? Does it have an illustration?
Yes, it has illustrations.
Snake that swallowed an elephant that looks like a cowboy hat.
I think that might be there? No, that's Flat Stanley, which is another excellent book. That's another excellent one.
That's not philosophy at all.
No, it is. No, it is. Well, it's
Stanley.
Yes. Well, it's about
the one where the little boy gets crushed and turned into a piece of paper and mailed to the mail. That one, Flat Stanley.
Oh, I don't know.
That's Flat Stanley.
Now but that's an introduction to mathematics and dimensions and geometry. Or are we thinking of different books?
I think we're thinking of different books. Flat Stanley goes on silly little kid adventures. He's like Curious George, but a piece of paper kid.
Flat Stanley I might be getting my books mixed up.
What book can you be thinking of?
I don't know. There's another one. But anyways, regardless, we're getting sidetracked. At some point in, I want to say...
when you said Flat Stanley, I was like,
I want to say early college. In early college, I did read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance by Robert Pirsig, which is an exploration of the idea of quality. Disguised as a novel.
So good. Speaking
it's
of
excellent.
Quality novels, so good. Very good.
You haven't read it.
I have read it.
When did you read it?
In 2021. I can show you my book record.
Okay. Wow. I didn't know.
Yes.
Excellent.
When I was on that rabid audiobook kick and I read 51 audiobooks in a year. I'm
glad you...
Yeah.
Oh, fantastic, babe. I wish you told me that.
So great. I told you at the time.
Okay.
You don't listen to me at all.
Only sometimes. Robert Pirsig and then a contemporary philosopher named Matthew Crawford, who was an interesting character. He's sort of a
interesting character one more time. This is a drinking game.
Who was sort of a PhD in the history of political thought turned motorcycle maintenance technician.
Who you met once.
Oh, I didn't know who he was at the time I met him.
No, but this is an adorable story. I think it's so cute. You went to something that was on campus at Bellevue College where he was giving a speech.
It was in Seattle, yeah.
Oh, it was in Seattle. Mm-hmm. So you go to this thing with, I don't know, some random friend who you convinced to go with you. And
they convinced me to go with them to this event. I did, yeah. There's like, I don't know, it's something about shop class. And it wasn't about shop class at all. It was about his new book, The World Beyond Your Head, which is about the attentional crisis. And so I had asked at the end of his talk, which was just a reading from a part of his book, and it was in the Q&A section, and I was just absolutely enraptured. He was talking about attention.
Chris
and the
walked in and was like, I've gone to church.
This is the best talk I've ever heard in my entire life. And he's talking about attention, and as he's talking about attention, the friend who brought me along is literally on their phone texting. And I was just like, this is so perfect. But during the Q&A, I told a funny story about a time in high school when the school had played the most obnoxious version of I Like to Move It you've ever heard. And you could pay money to make the music stop as a kind of like weaponized, as a kind of the worst kind of weaponized attention seizure you can imagine. like it was exactly to his point and made the crowd chuckle. But I asked him, because I had just read Jack Donovan a little while before. And I asked him if perhaps it was possible that the solution to this attentional problem required a degree of tribalism. And he didn't have an immediate answer to that and said we should grab drinks and talk about it afterwards.
Chris, I forgot that that's the question you asked him. He's gone in a completely like proto-tribalist direction. Do you think you influenced him at all?
I don't I don't think so. I don't think he remembers the one random dude.
Yeah, but what, Chris? Okay, listen to me, Chris Robertson. I have been around enough dudes who are like you to know that all it takes is one dude asking a really, really fucking good question, but that to get in their brain and bug them, even if they never again remember. And I swear, you need to email him. You need to get him on the podcast. Yes. You do need to email him and get him on the podcast
because he's been writing an excellent series on the administrative state.
But his book Drive had all of the elements that you're talking. I think.
No, his book Drive was a polemic against self-driving cars and other things.
I know that, but like, okay. Chris
Robertson. Tribalistic elements. Yeah, it did have a little bit of tribalism in that.
It's not in there, okay.
That's crazy to think about. I don't know.
Chris. Are you part of his villain origin story?
That would be cool. I don't think so. I like to imagine so. Then the credit would go to Jack Donovan, not to me. Well, yeah, Jack Donovan influenced me, and then if I influenced Matthew Crawford, that's cool.
Oh my God. I just the possibility that in any way influenced the course of Matthew Crawford's writings, just like literally, I feel like I'm meeting Ringo Starr. If so, so exciting.
If so, it would be cool repayment, I think, because I feel like he, in conjunction with Robert Pirsig, were the guys who set me on the desire to get into the trades, to get into the world of manual competence. Really, those two, and I would round out the trio with Mike Rowe, who I've talked about before in the podcast about work, which might be still one of the best solo podcasts I've done on this show.
So, but I feel like there are epochs of your development that I can like. I was thinking about this as it pertains to the books that you're working on. It's like In Defense of Hatred sprang naturally out of your interest in free speech, and then from there, the next step is okay. If some things are worth hating because you love something deeply enough, like what should you love? And the proto idea of your kind of paganism came out in Letter to Onwe, and then with it, to me, naturally followed that we needed to resolve, like, so what is your relationship with monotheism and Christianity, hence holy nihilism? And then you're like, okay, in the absence of that mythology, what do we put in place instead? And you're like, back to the Greeks. And enter Hero and the Man, and then now you're working on something that would be I know you keep calling it an essay. I think you have a full-on book here on solar phenomenology, and I'm like, to me, perfect linear sense. The more I know about you, and the more each of these, like, obviously I've known. Hopefully, your past is pretty immutable and won't change due to the collapsing time-space continuum. But I'm pretty. It makes sense to me how you ended up here and the thread of thoughts that you've been exploring in your books and then in your blog as well, on Instagram and on your podcast. And I feel like something I admire deeply about you is that you have always very aggressively pursued that, what do I say, like, continuity between your beliefs and your actions, and you've always relentlessly pursued knowing what not the truth is, but what the best way to be is, which I think is a very interesting
upcoming theme in a certain essay,
right? And I remember when we first met, it was something that I thought was a very, like, the phraseology seemed so weird, the way you said that I don't want to at the end of my life look back at my life and think that I mislived. And I found that conjugation to be so weird. It was so foreign to say that you could mislive. I was like, first of all, aren't you living your life every day? Like, shouldn't you be aware of whether you're going in a direction you want to go or not? But just that application of that prefix was always seemed weird to me. But it also very much, I can see how that desire to do it right with the one life you've got pushed a lot of the ideas and a lot of the thoughts you had moving forward, and pursuing something virtue-based, always looking for things like quality, things like a major theme in Holy Nihilism is this discussion around beauty, pursuing things, that which is beautiful, that which is of high quality, that which is deft and skilled and capable, and also in kind of an Odyssean sense, connected, that which is...
And it's important to say this is in a directional sense too. It's not necessarily absolute. I mean, you've talked a little bit about my familial background, like Charles Dunbrick and these other, like, poets and lawyers and people who could just randomly become judges by just sheer charisma, essentially.
Chris is incarnate his great grandfather, who got on a boat, and by the time he arrived at his destination in India, was in charge of the job. Like, just,
but like,
extreme charisma. I mean, you're very fun.
But
everyone likes you.
But I've been involved in the fitness world, trying to be more athletic, stronger, and so forth. And I will never be Hafthor Björnsson. I will never be these various strongmen because I do not have the genetics for it.
Right.
But that absence does not stop me from progressing further in that direction over time. Right. And the fact that you don't have the genetics to be a strongman or a gymnast,
an NBA player,
or a fantastic novelist, like, I am not nearly as smart as the greatest, philosophers in history. Kant and Aristotle might have had the highest IQ ever, like, for all I know. He might beat Chris, whatever his name is, that guy with a 200. Eugene Volokh, I know, is like 208 or something. There's another guy who had like a 250 IQ who's now trying to mathematically prove God or something after he discovered it. He was a plumber before. He should have just stayed a plumber. But
probably would have made more money at least.
Well, I'm sure he does fine now. But you don't have to be the greatest philosopher or classicist in the world to develop this skill and to get rewards from it, in the same way that you don't need to have the genetics of Hafthor in order to reap the rewards of pursuing physical strength. Just appreciating the incredible complexity and beauty of some of these arguments is worthwhile in itself. And so for anyone who's listening to this in the hopes of, like, how can I be more like this one quality that I think you have? First of all, it doesn't come quickly, as with physical strength.
And it doesn't necessarily feel like it's coming quickly. It's just like needing to get your reps in. It accumulates.
This was where I am now is the result of 20 years of really more or less obsessive pursuit of these subjects in relationship to each other.
Well, okay, and I don't want to dwell on this too much, but as somebody who has observed you, people might be like, how can you have obsessively pursued this? His capacity to remember to circle back to something he found interesting is unparalleled. Like I feel like it can be very easy. I know I get into this habit all the time where it's like, if I'm not doing things related to my children, then I'm doing things related to work. And if I'm not doing one of those two things, then I'm cleaning. And so I cycle through those three things. And every once in a while, Chris will remind me like, hey babe, you used to know how to knit. Hey babe, you can pass your eyeballs back and forth over a book for pleasure. Like you don't have to only do work for work, right? Chris has never let go of it's not even like you have a daily habit of this as a hobby.
No.
But it is you never go more than a few days without this hobby of listening to a podcast. Like you seek out this information, you find a way to integrate it into your day. Not every day contains a lot of it, but like it's just like getting your reps in. If every time you think of it, you do 10 squats and you look for a podcast on something that challenges your ideas a little bit, in a not that long amount of time, you will have accumulated a new discernment, new ideas, and maybe have gotten a little bit stronger. The thing that you have that I think anybody could cultivate with practice, even if you're not very verbal, even if you don't have any aspirations to like write or anything like that, you are so profoundly curious and you are willing to entertain ideas even if they are objectionable, even if they are counter to what you already believe. You're very, very curious and you're very open-minded to hearing new ideas. So if there was something that somebody wanted to do to be more like you, it would be that.
It would be to listen to Flat Earth Society members, as Christopher Hitchens once argued. Or, put another way, to listen to Plato's Republic, where they very self-consciously argue for a totalitarian, eugenic, noble lie censorshipful censoring state. It's like 1984 on steroids, but with the proviso at the beginning of Socrates complimenting young Adeimantus and Glaucon for their ability to entertain positions without accepting them. And then they begin this giant metaphor, which quickly loses track as a metaphor to most readers, of the just city and all of the totalitarian horrible things that some people still take literally, still take at face value, but it has that quality of entertaining things that we find deplorable, things that we find inhospitable. And maybe this ties into the whole free speech discussion. How could you have philosophy without free speech? How could you have philosophy in a society where speaking out against the gods or risking maybe poisoning the minds of the young might give you a maybe not a premature death, but an eventual death, or at the very least social death in our day and age. Yeah, censorship, cancellation, whatever you want to call it these days, and. I guess it maybe.
Let me.
We've been going for an hour and a half. It's probably time to wrap it up.
I know. We somehow managed to explain the premise of the just city, just so that we could keep a little more philosophy in here. I think that on principle, I would say pursuing things that you find as virtues, and trying to cultivate those qualities that you see as good in the world. 2, the curiosity, and 3, the other thing that you have always done.
And by curiosity, we mean not dismissing out of hand things that initially you might want to dismiss out of hand.
I will tell you, it's the reason why I can't read a lot of these philosophy books and things in the original, is because the style alone is so distasteful to me that I literally cannot. And so that's why I need you to read it for me. But the third one that you have always done is whether it was on your blog, way back when you had a baby blog, here on the podcast, on Instagram, you are writing these ideas down. Now, you don't have to put them out into the world, but as you are thinking through things, you make note of what you think about, how you're interpreting it. And that practice of not just learning an idea and passively accepting it, but being able to like repeat it back, to say it in your own words, to challenge it with your own thoughts. Like, you know, you, contrary to, I think, what a lot of Christians will tell you about, like, you know, you're not supposed to go along on your own wisdom. You have, and possibly better than Chris, a bullshit meter. And you may have some regulation idea of like what is or is not an acceptable or a good or a well thought out idea. Sort of like Jordan Peterson says, taking that idea to task and being able to write it out yourself is a practice that I think almost anybody could get better at philosophy by taking that to heart and doing it.
And I would say, I mean, lots of people will advise journaling, but writing a blog, even if it's only a blog for yourself that you go back and reread occasionally, people will say, will dismiss and talk down on reading your own words or hearing your own voice as something vain. No, that's a check against yourself. It's incredibly valuable to go back and to listen to what you said in the past or what you just said a few minutes ago. You know, re-listening to it, rereading what you just wrote to say, oh, do I feel the same way now? It gives a sense of continuity to your own thought, perhaps to your own identity, but also it helps you keep track of things that are important. I wouldn't remember the fraudulent Australian gun death data from pertaining to their 1995 assault weapon ban, gun ban, if I hadn't written about it and had the subject brought back up in a number of gun control discussions. The fact that that got written down makes me able to recall, oh yeah, there were studies that used that data in a fraudulent manner to say that gun control worked by redefining what qualified as a mass shooting in a Texas sharpshooter fallacy kind of way. Now, but I can only remember all that because I wrote it down, to your point.
Yes. So, carry us out, Dad. Happy birthday. Everyone on Instagram, wish him a happy birthday.
Yeah. So I guess our four takeaways are, one, if you want to do this, be, what were we saying? Be open and curious and not dismissive. Mm-hmm. 2 was...
I just recapped.
Okay. Well, and then I guess item 4 then is... seriously consider how badly you want to be a philosopher, because it might be a grass is always greener thing.
Yeah. You could be an artist and be broke. That's good too.
Or you could be a financier and be surrounded by financiers, which might be the worst.
That sounds kind of the worst.
Pick your poison and enjoy the fruits, I suppose. Well, anyways, thanks so much for listening to this. Wow, hour and a half. Thanks for listening. Take care.